Hello, my name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions.
And I'm Proven Paradox, a guy with a lot of questions.
And you're listening to Bright on Buddhism, a podcast where we discuss East Asian Buddhism, answering listener-submitted questions from listeners just like you, and introducing concepts of Buddhism that you may or may not be familiar with in a casual, conversational setting. Enjoy.
Here, I noticed that the 10 precepts guiding all morality according to the Dharma fall into 3 categories: actions of the body, verbal actions, and mental actions. What's the significance of this?
That's a good catch. They do indeed fall into those 3 categories, and they are central to achieving enlightenment. Many Buddhists think that the way to achieve Buddhahood is to align one's own body, speech, and mind with that of the Buddha.
Fascinating. All beings act bodily, verbally, and mentally. That would include the Buddha as well.
Exactly. Seeing this, the 10 precepts have a whole new context. Rather than representing morality for the sake of good karma and favorable rebirths, they represent a hidden ideal, collapsing any distinction between oneself and the Buddha.
Examining the entirety of the Buddha's teaching in this way would lead to some unique interpretations of the Dharma.
Yes, very much so.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Bright on Buddhism. This week we will be discussing the 3 mysteries in Shingon Buddhism. What are the 3 mysteries in Shingon Buddhism? What are their significance? How ought we understand them? We hope you enjoy. So, what are the 3 mysteries in Shingon Buddhism?
The 3 mysteries in Shingon Buddhism can be referred to in 2 ways: body, speech, and mind for one set, and mudra, mantra, and mandala for the other. These different ways to refer to the 3 mysteries are related in that body, speech, and mind are mundane, obvious, and exoteric, meaning revealed, while mudra, mantra, and mandala are perfected and sacred and esoteric, or secret. For more on the distinction between esoteric and exoteric, check out my reading and discussion of the Benkenmitsu Kyoron, link in the show notes. Let's take a brief look at each of the 3 and explain how they fit into the context of Shingon practice. Fair warning, Shingon is my research specialty, so strap in because we're going to get a lot of detail here. Let's begin with mudra. As we've discussed before, mudra are symbolic body poses that the Buddha demonstrated that carry a specific meaning. An easy example pose to look at is to make the hands flat and touch them to each other in front of your heart. It should look like the pose of Christian prayer. This is called gassho in Japanese, and it carries a connotation of gratitude and greeting. Another famous example is, while standing, to raise the right hand, palm facing forward, and drop the left hand down, with the palm also facing toward the viewer. This is the mudra of bestowing fearlessness. There are increasingly complicated ones that entail specific configurations of hands and fingers, and these mudras have numerous ritual functions, and all of these functions entail change. Some purify a ritual space, some sanctify spoken words, some invoke or summon the Buddha or Bodhisattvas, some manifest aspects of wisdom, moral perfection, or the like, and much more. The more complicated and esoteric mudras are initiatory, meaning that they can only be shared in secret between master and student. This is because the practitioner has to be ready. To use them clumsily, incorrectly, or inadequately could backfire in a severe way. To not have the requisite spiritual advancement to use the mudras is useless at best, or actively immoral and destructive at worst. It's up to the master to determine if the student is ready to receive the mudras or not. As we discussed before, replicating the body poses of the Buddha invokes him, manifests him, and makes oneself into a Buddha. Their aspect of change is crucial. They change the practitioner into a Buddha in their very body, and they perform or enact the activity of a Buddha on the world around them. Mantras are holy sounds, specifically the sounds and utterances of the Buddha. These too have the crucial function of change. The most well-known mantra in the West is Om Mani Padme Hum, the mantra of Avalokiteshvara. This mantra invokes Avalokiteshvara and his traits as a compassionate savior being, so it's used to request salvation from him or otherwise to invoke the spirit of compassion in a particular context to remove ills of any kind. Because mantras are sounds and utterances of the Buddha, preserving that sound is what affects the changes specific to each mantra's function, as opposed to the word's meaning. Thus, the Sanskrit sounds are preserved as Buddhism crosses cultural and linguistic barriers. Sanskrit has long been the holy liturgical language of Indian religions, just like Latin for Catholicism, Hebrew for Judaism, and Arabic for Islam. Unlike in those religions, the transliterations of mantras try their best to preserve the original sounds.
As I understand it, a lot of Jewish rituals and rites involve reading from the Torah in the original Hebrew. I also know of some very old Christian churches that still read in Latin. Is a similar principle at work here?
Yes and no. Latin, Hebrew, and Arabic are all considered sacred languages for those particular religious traditions. Thus, to be closest to the source material is to engage with it in that language. They argue that experiencing it in translation is a dilution of the original message and the original spirit of the text. However, all of the above examples all lack the importance placed on the actual sounds that the words make. That is unique to Buddhism, as far as I understand. In Buddhism, with mantras, the meaning is less important because the usage of the mantra is an invocation of an idea or figure. So, to engage with it in the original Sanskrit has nothing to do with reaching the original meaning as much as it does invoking the figure or the doctrine or the idea that is associated with it. As another example, the mantra of Shakyamuni Buddha in Sanskrit is Nama Samanta Buddhanam Ba. When transliterated into Japanese to be used in Shingon Buddhism, it is read No Maku Samanda Buddhanan Baku. To translate a mantra renders it somewhat useless. The sentences they make are often difficult to understand out of context, and they don't bear an immediately obvious connection to the function that the mantra may serve. Often, mantras are tiny phrases and snippets from sutras. As another example, the last sentence of the Heart Sutra, Gate Gate Pada Gate Padasam Gate Bodhisvaha, is a mantra. When translated, it roughly means gone, gone, gone over, fully gone over, awakening, rejoice. Out of context, this makes no sense, and it doesn't imply the function of the mantra, which is to invoke wisdom of emptiness, suchness, and Buddha nature. Mantras and their meanings and functions can also be initiatory, and their function is similarly to invoke the activity of the Buddha in this very world. When they are sutra quotes, they invoke the teaching of that sutra, even if they don't mention it explicitly. When they refer to the activity or a characteristic of a particular Buddha, they invoke the nature of that Buddha in oneself and in those around you. They signal communication of the teaching from the Buddha out of your own lips, again, putting you in the role of the Buddha, just like in the case of mudras. Mandalas correspond to the perfected mind, or in other words, the mind of the Buddha. Before we discuss mandalas, let's first describe what we mean by the mind of the Buddha. To have reached Buddhahood means to have perfectly aligned one's mind to the Dharma. In other words, the perfected mind is indistinct from the whole entirety of the Dharma. It does not impose misunderstandings about the nature of reality onto everyday experience due to the accumulation of karma, as would be the case with every other sentient being. Thus, the perfected mind cognizes the world exactly as it is. The Dharma is understood as being the core programming for all of reality. So another way to define the Dharma is to say that it is reality exactly as it is, free from delusion. At the same time, it is universal in the sense that it's embodied by everything that happens in the entirety of reality all the time, across all time and space. The Dharma is sometimes described as everythingness, because it is borne out by every single thing in reality all the time. Bringing all that together, that means that the mind of a Buddha is the entire universe. Now we can relate this back to mandalas. Mandalas are visual representations of the entire universe, and thus, simultaneously, representations of the mind of the Buddha. A famous example is the mandala of the 6 realms of transmigration. Many of our listeners may have seen this mandala.
And if you haven't, I recommend doing an image search. Quote, Mandala of the 6 realms of transmigration, end quote.
It looks like a wheel sliced into 6 sectors, with the inhabitants of the 6 realms depicted in each of their sectors or quadrants. humans, gods, lesser gods, animals, hell-dwellers, and preta. The wheel is being held or cradled by Yama, the deity of death, who delivers you from one incarnation to the next realm you're born into, due to your karma. Because it depicts all of those 6 realms, it depicts all of reality, according to a particular view of samsara. In addition, it visually represents the cosmology described by the Buddha in the sutras, and thus depicts the Dharma, because the Buddha preaches the Dharma in the sutras. To the trained eye, the image by itself implicates the concept of samsara, karma, impermanence, morality and immorality, dukkha, and many more crucial concepts in the Dharma, with just a single glance. Other mandalas communicate similar meanings, and again, these meanings and functions can be initiatory and are shared with monastics as they advance on the path. The ultimate endpoint of understanding mandalas is to view the everyday world around you as the sacred geography implied in the condensed representation of the mandala in front of you. We've talked about the universality and the Buddha activity of the 3 mysteries, but it should also be reiterated that the 3 mysteries can be understood as paths of practice unto themselves. They lead to the realization of the Shingon Buddhist ideal, and so apply to the individual practitioner. Each of the 3 mysteries entails activity and/or change, placing the emphasis of practice and wisdom on what the practitioner does. As we've stated a couple of times now, practicing the 3 mysteries is to align one's mental, verbal, and physical activities in the world around us with those of the Buddha. Because conventional reality and enlightened reality are very different in character, that means that the activity of the Buddha is sometimes what we would call supra-rational, meaning that it operates on levels beyond everyday understanding. That's why the 3 mysteries are initiatory. You have to be shown or told what the mantra or the mudra you are receiving actually does, not just what it looks like, not just when to use it, not just where it comes from, not just what it does on the level of everyday reality, but what it does in a complete and holistic sense. You can't use a tool correctly and effectively if you don't know what it does. In fact, to do so could be incredibly dangerous.
As I understand the idea, these actions invoke the power of the Buddha or Bodhisattvas, so any errors made when using them have that kind of force behind them. That's why they're dangerous for the uninitiated. You're using rocket fuel, and if your aim is off, you will blast off in the wrong direction.
Exactly. And these 3 mysteries are often described as a rocket ship either to Buddhahood in the very instantaneous, immediate way that we talk about it, or to hell-dwelling and suffering.
What is the significance of the 3 mysteries?
In Shingon Buddhism, they encapsulate instantaneous and complete attainment of Buddhahood in this very body. In that regard, they're taught as part of the quickest possible practice in all of Buddhism. This property of the 3 mysteries reflects a universal principle in esoteric Buddhism, the total being reflected in the singular. Shingon Buddhism views all of reality as being reflected in every single individual iteration or instantiation or thing in reality. Because of dependent origination, all things are connected by a network of causal relationships. These causal relationships are reflective in the sense that they exist because of a shared nature between all things, known as emptiness. This is described by Indra's net, a metaphor we read and discussed in our episode on the Avatamsaka Sutra, link in the show notes. Shingon actually credits its understanding of emptiness to the Avatamsaka Sutra and the Indra's net metaphor in it, and thus credit their understanding to Huayan or Kegon Buddhism. In concrete terms, the total being reflected in the singular means that any and every single thing in the world that we see, experience, or interact with in our lives has the shared nature of Dharma. This could be referred to as Buddha nature as well. Rocks, trees, rivers, mountains, living things, computers, desk chairs, poop, and house cats are all understood to have the nature of the Dharma. To take it one step further, the entire Dharma is thought of as flowing forth from all of these things at all times. That means that they don't just have the nature or characteristic of Dharma, they actually are all the Dharma being preached in their own individual way. The 3 mysteries reflect that principle in that a single hand motion or a single utterance can directly invoke and implicate the entire Dharma in a single instant. At the largest scale, they reflect the totality of the Buddha's activity in the universe in a single instant. So, the three mysteries have these three characteristics simultaneously. 1. They're representative of the Dharma. Mantras are quotes from the Buddha himself preaching the Dharma, mudras are the body poses the Buddha does to achieve various goals, and mandalas represent the cosmology, the universe, the way reality actually is. 2. They are representative of the entire universe. Because the Dharma is everythingness, representing the Dharma also inherently means representing the entirety of the universe in a single instantiation of reality. 3. They are all representative of the activities of the Buddha. The three mysteries are all activities that affect change on the world around us. Thus, they represent perfected activity, or the activity of the enlightened. This is why they're considered, sometimes, supra-rational. When we explore the relationship of these characteristics more deeply, we can even draw a connection between the way reality presents itself to us in our everyday experience and the activity of the Buddha. We've discussed many times that Shingon Buddhism considers reality to be composed of the Dharmakaya, or the Dharma body of Mahavairocana, the cosmic Buddha. The Dharmakaya is a very interesting concept for English speakers in particular because it uses a term we're familiar with to describe something unfamiliar. The body of the Dharma can be understood similarly to the way we understand a writer's quote-unquote body of work, or their quote-unquote corpus. However, the concept of the Dharmakaya goes a step further and collapses any and all distinction between the Buddha as a personified figure and the Dharma as a concept. In other words, the concept of the Dharmakaya renders the Buddha identical to the Dharma that he preaches. Thus, Buddha and Dharma come to share the same characteristics. The Buddha is universal like the Dharma, and the Dharma is active like the Buddha. In practice, that means that all sounds are his spoken words, all physical manifestations are his body, and all space is his mind. In Shingon Buddhism, all of the universe is the Dharma being preached by the Dharmakaya of Mahavairocana. To bring this back to something we were talking about earlier in the episode, the three mysteries are the perfected and purified body, speech, and mind of the Buddha. That implies that there is an imperfect and impure body, speech, and mind. This is true and is reflected in the everyday reality that we experience. The impure and imperfect reality is no less Buddha nature than perfected reality. This is encapsulated by an idea that Shingon Buddhism carries known as relativity. Things that we impose categories of moral good and moral bad onto do not actually have any inherent or substantial good or bad characteristics. Those are concepts that we devise and apply ourselves. When we do, it leads to behaviors of seeking and avoidance, coming and going. These are deluded behaviors because they are based on contrivance and making judgments based on an inadequate or incomplete understanding of reality. Given the universality of the Dharma, all things are Dharma, even things we have gone on to say are immoral, bad, unwholesome, or whatever. Those bad things are just as much the activity of the Buddha as the good things. In practice, Shingon Buddhists take this to mean that even bad things can lead you to the Dharma and lead you to enlightenment. There's something to learn and something positive, even in difficult times. It's a perspective of optimism, holism, and appreciation for all life, not just the good. Although it has that platitudinous characteristic, we should look at it in an exegetical context. Exegetical means understanding how it fits conceptually with the rest of Shingon doctrine. The fact that even the bad is Dharma in nature and is the activity of the Buddha introduces the problem of theodicy. If all is Buddha activity, and the Buddha is supposedly universally good, then why does bad stuff happen? This can be a very troubling question. The problem of theodicy is known to make religious people lose faith and turn away from religion. When we've discussed this before, we have resolved it in the following way. Mahavairocana does not act as an omnipotent, personified figure in the way that the Christian God does. Theodicy is originally a Christian problem, and is addressed to a Christian God who is anthropomorphized and responsive to stuff humans say and do. When Christians pray, they suppose that God sometimes hears and then does something that changes reality in response. This doesn't apply to Mahavairocana, who does not unilaterally and all-powerfully make determinations on the world and execute them. A Buddha does not have the power to change the Dharma. The Dharma is the source code for all reality, which he gained insight into and came to share the same nature with. The Dharma is not something that is piloted. So when a bad thing happens to you, it's not Mahavairocana's choice that happens to you. Rather, it is described as the result of karma, which I emphasize is a passive property of reality. In other words, what you put in over the course of many eons is what you get out over the course of many eons. In Shingon, it is considered overly self-centered to think thoughts such as, I'm being singled out and punished with hardship by insert deity here. And I tend to agree with that.
How ought we understand the three mysteries?
I would say that they are one of many different possible distillations of the totality of Shingon thought. In other words, I think that a thorough examination of the three mysteries and how they're applied in practice tells you a great deal about Shingon Buddhism. They tell you about how Shingon Buddhists practice, the constant preaching of the Dharma by all of reality, and a doctrine known as Sokushin Jōbutsu, attainment of Buddhahood in this very body, in this very instant. As I've mentioned, mantras are speaking in the Buddha's voice, mudras are moving the Buddha's body, mandalas are cognizing with the Buddha's mind. Then, the fact that all reality is also the body and speech and mind of Mahavajracana tells you that we all have Buddha nature. They demonstrate that we have a shared nature with the Buddha. If we do the three mysteries, and the Buddha does the three mysteries, and all of reality is the three mysteries, then that means that the foundation of all is the same. Buddha nature, Dharma, everythingness, etc., whatever label you want to call it. These are all terms that refer to the same thing. The last thing I want to discuss in this context is the secretiveness involved in all. Shingon is an esoteric strain of Buddhism, meaning that there is an underlying thought that the spoken words and visible actions of the Buddha were exoteric, and there is a hidden meaning to the Dharma that was esoteric. Esoteric thinkers in Buddhism sought to look between the lines and piece together a picture of what is actually being said and done and meant by the Buddha in the sermons. They examined the sutras closely with the knowledge that the Buddha's sermons have multiple layers of meaning, and that the Dharma is presented in a particular way according to the capacity of his audience. In other words, they said, okay, I can read and understand what he's saying in this sutra, but I recognize that that means I'm part of a particular audience. What would I see if I were part of a different audience? The picture they put together cannot be accessed through conventional means. The pieces of the picture must be transmitted from master to student according to the student's capacity, the same way that the Buddha transmitted the Dharma. Revealing the whole picture up front is overwhelming, and the meaning and significance of it is not self-evident. You have to establish context both in thought and in practice to understand the secret at the heart of it all. The three mysteries are one of the vehicles by which you are able to build up that knowledge, that context, and that capacity. We practice the three mysteries every day regardless of being affiliated with Shingon or not, because we have bodies, we have speech, and we have minds. Thus, perfecting or changing these practices in the Shingon fashion is the bread and butter of how to achieve the Shingon Buddhist ideal, and the stages through which that practice advances are initiatory. That being the case, I should also note that Shingon thinkers have revealed the secret at the heart of it all, and I've spoken on it on this show and even in this episode. It is the Dharma World text that we have talked about. There are more details involved that we won't go over now, but it's important to know that it's described as an open secret because in Shingon Buddhism, though the secret is not thought of as self-evident, it is thought of as being yelled out by all of reality all the time for those with the capacity to perceive it. In order for Shingon thinkers to textually debate on the nature of the secret and distinguish themselves from other forms of Buddhism, they have to tell the secret. In order to describe Shingon Buddhism to prospective practitioners, they have to explain what it's all about and what's at the heart of it all. In that way, they must tell the story and demonstrate the unique value that they perceive Shingon has over other schools of Buddhism. If you're going to claim that your ideology is a better one, you have to be ready to answer the question of why or how. And you can only go so far answering that question in Shingon without having to explain concretely what everyone is all practicing toward and why they do what they do. That open secret does not preclude practice and initiation, it just speaks to the guiding ethos of Shingon practice.
The open portions of the secret they reveal is also surface level and missing details vital to actually understanding what they're talking about. We can demonstrate the same principle with some math. I can tell you that the cosine of 2 pi in radians is 1, but without understanding what cosine pi or radians are, you can't really do much with that information. The same applies with the mysteries.
This is very true. The operations that we're discussing here and that are described in Shingon Buddhism are operating beyond everyday cognition and knowledge. So even knowing those operations and being able to repeat them and describe them is still not knowing the whole story, because it lacks context and meaning that's established through initiation and study.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode on the three mysteries. Join us next week where we will be discussing the fourth moral precept of Buddhism. What is the fourth moral precept of Buddhism? What is its significance? And how have interpretations of it changed over time? We hope to see you there. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Hi, Nick here, and you've been listening to Bright on Buddhism. Normally at this point in the episode, we would throw to a charity that we think that is deserving of your money or your support. Because there's so much going on right now, we have decided that we're going to open it up to any charity that you think is a good cause to share your resources with. So, if you like our show and would like to support us, please instead give to a charity that you believe does good things for people in need. Thank you.
My name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions and voice of Hearer.
And I'm Dox, editor, question asker, and voice of Hermit.
And this has meant Bright on Buddhism. Thank you for listening. If you like our podcast, or if you have a question you'd like us to discuss, we'd love to hear from you. Please consider leaving a comment or review, subscribing, or joining us on social media. Email us at bright.on.buddhism@gmail.com or find us on Mastodon at brightbuddhism@mstdn.party. As always, citations and resources for this episode can be found in the show notes. Thank you.